What's up, gamers? Today's topic is probably something you're pretty familiar with, that being toxicity. Toxicity as in chemical toxicity, but as well as in gamer toxicity, that is, let's just call it linguistic toxicity. What do I mean by this? Well, maybe you're familiar with the concept in toxicology of the lethal dose, or the median lethal dose, which is for any given chemical or chemical compound of any kind, there is what people call a lethal dose at which most people, if they ingest that quantity of this studied chemical, will die. It's called the LD50, median lethal dose. It's a bit more complicated than that, in that it's not really people dependent, but rather calculated as a sort of average, over the quantity of toxic compound over the per kilogram of the individual concerned. So you have this LD50, right? And that all chemicals have, by the way, even like the most simple chemical, which is water, has an LD50, which is very high, obviously, because you need to drink a lot of water to die from H2O poisoning, but there is a lethal dose. So what I was thinking about is, toxicity in the gamer world is used to talk about trash talking and stuff like that, like when you type GG in the chat when you just kill someone or something like that. Like, this is commonly referred to as toxicity. And I was like, is there a way to combine this toxicology concept of the LD50, the median lethal dose, with gamer toxicity? And I mean, obviously there is. That's why I'm making this video. And more precisely, I'm going to talk about slurs, gamer words, if you will, such as, I'm not going to say them, but, and that's going to be a topic of the video, by the way, that's going to be the N-word, the F slur, the R word, all of these gamer words that are commonly referred to as toxic in gamer spheres, and in the real world, slurs. Now, how to really bridge the gap of a chemical and a word? And that's the biggest issue, and I think it's not that big of an issue, actually, because when you really think about it, okay, instead of qualifying a lethal dose at which you die, because you don't really die from being called the N-word, it's not bad, it's not good, but you don't die. Whereas if you drink cyanide, you die. So we need to adapt this. It's not lethal. It's a dose at which it's maybe toxic, like say any word is by default, if you don't use it, not toxic. Okay, that's the base case. If you don't say the N-word, you're not being toxic. Okay, that's, I mean, everybody agrees with that. I think, I hope nobody uses the N-word commonly or at all, unless you're black. Obviously it's different, but whatever. That's a complication in the theory we are going to have to tackle later in the video. But let's say, okay, we have this base case. Every single word, when used not at all, is zero toxic. Okay, at which point do you consider a slur to become toxic? And I'm using slur in the very large sense. You could say any word. At which point, how many times do you have to call somebody something or say a certain word where it becomes toxic? You have the extreme examples, the N word, the K word, all of these. The lethal dose, the LD50, if you will, the dose at which these words become toxic is 1, right? You say it one time, you're basically banned from every single premises you've been in. Only if, and that's where it's important to kind of get the context. If you're black, you can say the N word. Not in every context, but in most contexts, when you're with friends, you can call your friend the N word, like in a very specific way. Obviously, not the same word exactly, and that's where you have to distinguish between soft A and hard R N words. There is no such thing for the K word, obviously. This one is like in every single context pretty toxic, unless you're Jewish and you're referring to it like I got called this, and like, yeah. Okay, and so first of all, these things are situation dependent and speaker dependent. And that's where the concept of the LD50 becomes very interesting, because as I said, the LD50 works for everyone because it computes the toxicity as an average, not an average, a median over the body weight of people. So you can apply it to anybody, right? By multiplying it by your own weight. So how do I add this to toxicity? It's impossible. This theory is not really perfect, and you can't say, okay, the N-word's LD50 is 1 for everyone. It's not true. It's basically 1 if you're white and infinite if you're black, unless you're in a situation which it's not okay to say the N-word. Like, you know what I mean? It's very complex. And that's why it's not a perfect analogy. It's just a somewhat okay analogy. So let's just say, as a white person, the LD50 for the N-word is 1. Okay, if I say it once, it becomes toxic. And that's that. You have to compute the LD50 of every single slur, every single word, for every single ethnicity or stuff like that, and it becomes really useless, because when you think about the R word, who can say it? If you're simply a little bit autistic, can you say it? Is it as bad if you say it, as okay to say it if you're a little bit autistic, as when someone who has Down syndrome says it? Like, it becomes pretty much useless as a concept. When you really think about it. But if you don't think about it too much, it's pretty fun, right? So let's keep going. Let's look at other slurs and look and compute the LD50, if you will. If you're not, I mean, okay, there's also something to consider. Not only is it speaker dependent, it's also addressee dependent. Who are you saying it to? How are you saying it? And in what context? And these are not necessarily things that you can easily mathematize and put into an equation and get something that's true for most people, right? Obviously. So for example, I'm a white person, okay, and I have to read out loud Huckleberry Finn or whatever, the book where the N-word is said. Basically, you know what I mean. I don't know if it's Tom Sawyer or The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn or whatever. I'm not American, and I have to say it because I have to read it out loud. Is it toxic then? That's a big, is it? I'm not really the one to say, but I don't think it's as toxic as just going up to a random black person and calling them the N-word. Obviously, everybody can agree with that, I think. So you have a non-zero, but not one toxicity. You have maybe 25% toxicity, 0.25 toxicity rate, which is not good. You don't want that. That's why people say you don't say the N-word is in any capacity. But it's not that as bad as being just outright racist. You can be not racist and read a couple of things. Now, okay, other context. I'm reading this book by myself, and I'm obviously I'm reading it in my head. And obviously I come to that point and I have to think the N-word. What's that? Obviously, I am myself both the speaker and the addressee in this situation. And you could say it's not racist then, at all. But is it not a teeny tiny bit racist to think the N-word when you're white? I don't know. Obviously, I'm not. But I'm not confident that it's not so much that I will say it's a zero toxicity, LD50. It's like a 0.00001 toxicity on the scale of white person thinking the N-word to themselves in the context of reading a Culberry film. Now, if you're in traffic and like a black person cuts you off, and you think the N-word, then like it's one. It's one. Obviously, like it's pretty. Like you're just being racist, but because the guy can't hear you, you're just thinking it, and like that's one. Obviously. But it's different when you're reading literature. Other thing. There's this French artistic movement and social movement and social, artistic, political, everything movement that has the N-word in its name, but it was created and coined by a black person, African person, like from Africa, not like French, not African American, but like, and it has the N-word in its name. And I was recently reading a book by an author, which refers to this artistic movement in a positive way, by the way, and I had to read it, obviously, in my head. Is it fully zero then? Because it's not exactly the N-word. And it's a positive thing. I'm willing to say in this situation that it is zero, to be honest. And I mean, tell me if you're black, African. I don't want to hear African American people say, because you're probably not familiar with the movement. If you are, obviously do tell, but it seems to me at least that it hasn't really become popular outside of the Francosphere, the Francophonic sphere. But do say if you are familiar with it, obviously. So yeah, I'm not ready to say it's toxic, and it's not, obviously, but it's not, and that's where you can't stay within a true and false binary of toxic and not toxic. You have to go beyond that. You have to be how toxic. You have to become a bit further with your definition of toxicity in this case, and here I would say it's pretty close to zero. It's probably even zero, but we can't really determine it. You're probably familiar with the quantum mechanic concept of like uncertainty principle, where you can't really tell where something is and when it is where you think it is. Where it's the same, you can't really as a white person say if something is racist or not, and both be woke and racist. I hope it's clear. It's clear in my head at least. Anyways, let's look at something a bit less controversial than the N-word, because obviously you have all these words that I've said before. No, I mean mentioned in the video. The R-word, the K-slur, the F-slur, the N-word. You can't even say them. Their LD50 is one. But you have a lot of other insults which would be considered to be not as bad, and that people say all the time, like bitch or dumbass or asshole, and like you even go like to children and they're calling each other like doo-doo heads and stuff like that, and stuff like it's. Are we? What's the LD50? Because we have to go outside beyond the one, the LD50 of one that the N-word is. Obviously, you can't say like imagine a word where you can't say doo-doo head, and everybody, if you do, like everybody just looks at you like you said the N-word. Like that's obviously this would not be an accurate representation of the real word. This theory that I'm giving you. So, what is the LD50 of these words? And I think once again it's situation dependent. A child calling another child a doo-doo head is probably a pretty low LD50, like once or twice, and you're probably like as a kid you're probably getting angry. That's probably the worst word that you know, unless your parents are racist, but you don't really know that the N-word is bad in that case. So yeah, this is a very low, high LD50 for an adult to another adult, unless the other adult was bullied in their youth and called doo-doo heads. Maybe it's a bit lower. Maybe instead of 50, it's like 48. I don't know, but like, you know what I mean? Like, you can pretty safely call someone a doo-doo head 50 times in a row. Before that, they're probably not gonna say anything. They're probably gonna call you annoying, obviously, but they're not gonna fucking hit you. The same way you might get hit if you call someone the N-word 50 times in a row. So yeah, and that's also something else that needs to be taken into consideration. What is, because when you're talking about chemical compounds, the consequence is death. That's what the LD50 calculates. With words, rarely the consequence is death. Most often, maybe you're gonna just lose friends. If you call your black friend the N-word as a white person, you're probably not gonna be friends anymore unless you have, an arrangement. But if you're just meeting someone that's black, and calling them the N-word, probably never going to become friends. That's pretty safe bet. But if you call someone a doo-doo head 50 times in a row, they're not gonna stop being your friends unless it's a frequent occurrence. If you just do it once, let's just say where you're drunk, they're not gonna be like, I'm never talking to you again. They might tell you to shut up, but like, do we really want the LD50 for words to compute on the same level? Someone telling you to shut up and calling someone the N-word. Is this something we want? And I think in a perfect world where this metric is more accurately thought out, and I'm just saying this is what I'm doing is experimenting. I'm laying the groundwork, putting it out there, as they say, for people who are smarter than me, or maybe who have more time to think about these things, to think it out a bit more than myself. And obviously this is an issue with this theory, is that if you want it to be quite, and that's also an issue with the LD50, by the way, it's the median lethal dose, which means that 50% of people are going to be able to withstand a higher dose without dying. And the LD50 needs to be the median because you don't want, to say 99.9 people are going to survive, but 1% might die. Like, at this point, it's useless, but you don't want to say, like, you want it to be a good rule of thumb, not an accurate description of what will happen to you necessarily. Also, but some chemicals have a LD50 so low that you can't even ingest such a small quantity of said chemicals. So you're pretty much guaranteed to die, no matter what the LD50 is at this point. But what was I saying? I fucking forgot. Yeah. This is also a problem because with saying slurs, you might encounter people who are much more tolerant of getting called names, name called. I am not, for example, and you might, in my case, encounter people who are really not happy with being name called, like at all. Even maybe getting called a doo-doo head. I mean, I'm not saying I'm that susceptible, but you never know. You never know. Some people really, really don't like getting called anything, even their name. Some people don't want to be perceived. And I mean, at this point, any word to them is as a LD50 of 1. Because, you don't want to talk to them. Rather, they don't want you to talk to them. And do we really need these people? Because to influence the calculation of the LD50. I mean, obviously there are outliers, and the median is supposed to account for outliers better than the average, which is good. But when you're talking about chemicals, and words, median people are very different. You know what I mean? You're more likely to find outliers in how people react to words than chemicals, because the human mind maybe is a bit more complex than, in its reaction, at least, than the human body in its reaction to cyanide poisoning. You know what I mean? Like, and obviously I'm taking extreme examples, maybe, and I'm sure actually, being called a doo-doo head any amount of times, and ingesting a mildly poisoning substance are both very, very difficult to compute. For instance, what is the LD50 of microplastics? Nobody knows. I mean, maybe people know. I don't know. I didn't do any research besides looking up the name LD50 because I knew it, but I forgot it, and I needed to be reminded of what it's called. But okay, maybe doo-doo head is the microplastics of linguistic toxicity. You know what I mean? Because at the end of the day, the human mind is a part of the human body, and you find kind of common problems. Some things are some things are very difficult to compute for the human body because of a lot of environmental factors, and it's pretty much the same for the human mind and language. So it's not that crazy of a comparison in this case. You know what I mean? So it's, in both cases, an imperfect measurement. And I mean, you might say that why do you really need to measure the LD50? Like, okay, what I mean is, okay, when the consequence is death, it's useful to compute at least something. You know what I mean? Like, you don't want to play around with dying. But if the consequence is being told to shut up, do we really need to compute even at all? If not an inaccurate measurement, maybe not. I don't know. And to be honest, I'm not really one of these people that do things because it's useful, right? I do this because I just get the impulse to do something and I do it. And I mean, that's a problem sometimes. And in this case, but in this case, I think it's for the betterment of humanity. And I'm not saying this lightly. But I'll leave you with that to ponder for yourself. To go back to the issue at hand, because this has been kind of a big digression. The LD50 of the head is pretty much impossible to compute. The same way that the LD50 of microplastics is pretty much impossible to compute. First of all, let's keep going in the analogies. There is not a single one type of microplastics. There is a bunch of different types. The same way that there isn't only one way to refer to someone as a doo-doo head, there are multiple ways to do so in English. And obviously, you have a lot of different languages on Earth, estimated to be between 7,000 and 3,000, I think. But like a lot, that's a lot. Anyways. And okay, so do we need to compute the LD50 for each and every single type of microplastics, or at which point the term microplastics becomes useless, because if you're not really like referring to a class of things that have similar properties, why does the class need to exist at this point? And that's obviously like similar. Maybe doo-doo head is not a good category because even in French, for example, a language which is not related strictly to English. I mean, through the Indo-European relation, obviously, but like besides that, it's as related to French as it is to Russian. But historically and in linguistics, there's this whole like developing, and it's old, but it's become quite popular. I find lately of contact linguistics and contact, where like instead of considering quote unquote genetic relationships between languages, you develop real relationships. Like these languages have had a lot of contact throughout the years, and obviously that has had an effect on both. And that's the case for English and French, because France and England are quite close geographically, and France quite honestly has had a lot of political influence through Normandy in England, to the point where like the entirety of the Celtic angles and people has been pretty much reduced to nothing in England, and replaced with Norman culture, which is close to French culture. Anyways, what the fuck was I saying? Yes, we don't have in French a doo-doo head equivalent, a one-to-one doo-doo head equivalent. We have has head, tête de cul, which is, in my opinion, quite close, obviously, because has and butt and poo and doo-doo are quite, part of the same sphere of influence, if you will, in the human body. But it's not a one-to-one equivalent, and if you're deciding to calculate the toxicity of doo-doo head, and by that you mean to do it for every single language, you need to take this kind of things into consideration. You're not going to find an equivalence, a one-to-one equivalency. Imagine French and English are quite close. There is not a one-to-one equivalence. Now, look at, for example, a language that is both quote-unquote genetically and geographically and politically and everything you need to say that, to show that these languages are very different, like Chinese and English. You're not going to get much. You're not going to get much useful data. So yeah, that's one thing to consider. But let's say something that has a lot of in at least in the white communities, sphere, whatever, like in Europe and in North America, the N-word is pretty omnipresent in every single language. You have a one-to-one N-word equivalent in pretty much every single European language, because every single European country or people has been pretty fucking racist in their history. And even then, you have Spanish, which for the M-word uses the exact same word as for the color black. What do you do then? Do you say the LD50 of the N-word in Spanish is 0, is 1, like it is in English? Or do you say that it is infinite, because you can call something black because it is black an infinite amount of time, it's never going to be offensive? You know what I mean? Obviously, neither option is correct, and both are correct at the same time. So what do you do then at this point? You try to look up how things like that are handled in physics, in quantum physics. And I'm not really like I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to develop it into quantum physics because I can't. I don't have the required knowledge, and to be honest, I don't have the energy right now. But if this subject of linguistic toxicity is something that you're interested in and want to develop, and I mean you do, obviously, this might be an area where you might find some answers. Because quantum physics, to be honest, is very good at dealing with things that are two opposites at the same time, and to be honest, I think that's admirable. You might also look up, topology, and because that's what quantum physics uses to solve these problems a lot of the time, and by making them these huge problems with an infinite amount of variables into smaller problems, solvable problems. You might look into gender studies. Maybe these people have a bit of knowledge on that. Maybe they've thought about these concepts of being two different things at the same time, being the same thing at two different times, whatever. I'm just spitballing at this point, but I'm just giving you, little ways you can research this on your own later. And also, obviously, you might want to ask sociologists of African American people, or the sociology of marginalized people in general, which gender student, where people would study gender, might have an idea on. But obviously, gay people and stuff and women are not the only marginalized people, so you might look into different subject of studies like Black history, and things like that. History of anti-Semitism and stuff like that. It might be interesting. But as for these words, the study of the words that are not really offensive, but are kind of offensive at some point, like, okay, until now, I've only talked about words that are insults, used specifically to hurt someone's feelings, be it, very, very badly, or just like a little kid maybe getting a bit too angry. But what of other words? Let's say verbs. You can imagine insulting verbs. When you describe that someone is, I don't know, dancing poorly. What do you call that? I mean, there's a lot of verbs that are used to describe something in an insulting way. Nothing comes to mind right now because my brain is fucking off. But you can find them. Scrambling, right? Scrambling. When you describe that someone is scrambling to find the proper words, like me right now, that's insulting. But also, like, you can just say someone is scrambling eggs, and that's not insulting because that's literally what they're doing. So, like, how do you treat these? But even beyond that, some words are not inherently insulting in any way and can't be interpreted as such, in my opinion, such as prepositions. Some prepositions can be insulting, like when used in the wrong context, but some prepositions are so ubiquitous that they've pretty much lost all meaning and therefore are pretty hard to use to insult someone, like at. But okay, wrong example, because I think someone has become like a provocation. In slang, it's become used as a verb to don't ask me, and that's provocative. Very, very wrong example. And I mean, that's kind of the thing with language, is that you can make it pretty much whatever you fuck you want. You have no restriction, and historically everything that can happen with language has happened, which is pretty insane. Because obviously don't at me and stuff like that is pretty recent in English, but in Chinese they've been using prepositions as verb for like pretty much thousands of years. So we're pretty late, not as insult or stuff like that, but verbs. So let's think of any other type of word, and I'm looking at the traditional parts of speech. I mean, it's probably not the right way to go about that, but that's a pretty convenient way to look at that. So we've done prepositions and they can be insulting. So what about determiners and articles? Because these things are pretty meaningless when you look at them, and some languages don't even have them, so their status as a part of speech is disputed. They can be seen as adjectives, and if they're adjectives, obviously adjectives are pretty much the prime example for insulting words. But if, let's assume determiners is a legitimate part of speech, let's look at it in English. The. To be honest, you might say, well, you can't really find any way to use the insultingly. And I'm going to prove you wrong by saying the Chinese, the Mexican, the French. You never say these noun phrases to say something nice. Like, you never say the Chinese are really good at this. No, you say the Chinese eat fucking dogs. And I mean, obviously that's racist, but and I don't mean it, obviously, but that's usually what the Chinese is going to introduce when you're using it like that. The blacks That's even fucking worse. So you see, even the can be insulting. And if a, or n, this word is even worse, because when you're referring to a trans person as a trans, you might as well call them DT slur. So don't do it. Obviously, I'm just saying it's pretty close in meaning. So even words as benign as determiners can be used to insult people. Let's look at another part of speech then. We've done prepositions, we've done determiners, verbs, adjectives, nouns. What else is there? Conjunctions. Now that's a bit harder because, okay, to find an insulting way to use a conjunction is pretty hardcore. But let's consider this. That is a conjunction and a determiner and a pronoun, which both determiners and pronouns are used to be insulting all the time, especially that, like that thing, that guy. I don't want that. You're not saying something nice. So even though its conjunctive use is not inherently insulting, the fact that it shares the exact same form as other insulting words kind of renders it, part of the insulting vernacular, in my opinion. Let's look at other conjunctions, because not all conjunctions, at least in English, share a form with another word. So, what other conjunction is there? Which sounds like which, the word, the noun. Okay, everybody agrees that calling a woman a witch out of, because she looks ugly is insulting. Let's look at something else. And I could go on. Obviously, I'm not going to, because every single, probably, I don't know every single conjunctive word. Maybe and, or, but, but no, because it sounds like ass. But and or, can you use them in an insulting fashion? An or is also something you use on a boat, but I don't think I know any way to use that insultingly either. Though you never know, obviously. Nouns can become reappropriated very easily to become insults. Okay. And is used insultingly all the time. When you're saying this guy, that guy, and obviously, and that guy, and him, and her, like, it's all in the tone, obviously, in the context, but and can be used insultingly. So let's go outside of conjunctions and look at pronouns. Clearly, pronouns, we don't have to give a lot of examples because they are very easy to use insultingly. First of all, you're looking at a man and you're saying him like that. Obviously, you're not saying something nice about him. But you can also misgender people with pronouns. I mean, the sky is the limit with pronouns. I mean, they're pretty close to nouns, so that makes sense. Adverbs are pretty much adjectives. I mean, they're not pretty much adjectives whatsoever, and linguists are going to kill me for saying that. But adverbs, like adjectives, can be easily used to say something insulting, and obviously, and even you can use a verb as innocuous as go. Is going to Paris, and use an adverb like fucking. Is fucking going to Paris. That becomes an insulting sentence. Is going to fucking Paris. he's going, and also he's going to fuck in Paris, but that's besides the point. So, you know, I think I can rest my case now. Every single word can become offensive and insulting, so every single word, exactly like every single chemical compound, can have a lethal dose. And very much like chemical compounds, some words are very, very difficult to compute for toxicity. The same way some chemicals are very difficult to compute for toxicity. So I don't think I need to go on very much longer to show you that this is not necessarily an interesting theory to develop, but an interesting point of view, thing to ponder on. I like to say I like to ponder my orb, and my orb obviously is metaphorical, and in this case, the orb is this video. Okay, so go ponder your orb, whatever that is. Maybe I'm fishing in Minecraft. Prime breaks.